Hello and welcome to WTO Forum. Later this year, governments from all corners of the world will descend on Rio de Janeiro for the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development. The two broad themes of the conference will be the green economy and the institutional framework for sustainable development. There is no question that trade intersects with these themes and with other environmental questions. But the question for us today is, what challenges and opportunities does this conference, does the issue of sustainable development create for the WTO and its members? We're very fortunate to have with us today two experts on this matter. Mark Halle, Director of Trade and Investment and the European representative of the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and Manuel Teehankee, the former ambassador to the WTO from the Philippines and former chairman of the Committee on Trade and Environment in special session. Welcome to you both. Manuel, let's start with you. How can the WTO be supportive?
Well, thank you for this invitation. And of course, indeed, as you mentioned, trade and environment intersect. In our committee meetings, when I was chair of the Committee on Trade and Environment, the main focus was how can indeed the trade community contribute while keeping to the environment community the lead of where to go. And the triple win is what we have always discussed. There must be enough trade opportunities through market access opportunities, and that's the trade win. We must also have a developmental win wherein we are sensitive to the need for domestic economies to improve their environmental capacity in terms of production and exports. And third is the environmental good, which is how overall the combination of trade and development can indeed contribute to promoting environmental aims. And so the trade intersection here is the way we can contribute through tariff and non-tariff barrier reduction.
A triple win. Mark, your thoughts?
Thank you. Well, I think we don't yet know exactly what Rio is going to bring us. You mentioned that it will deal with the question of the green economy, the transition to the green economy. And I think it's important to understand that this is a recognition that 20 years ago, when we launched sustainable development at the global level, we haven't succeeded. And I think that the lesson we've learned over the past 20 years is that, in fact, it's not good enough simply to take the environment into account, to try and mainstream it into economic policy. Because what about if the economic policy is going the wrong direction? What if it's the wrong economic policy? So I think the real important lesson from Rio is that it's not about mainstreaming. It's actually about restructuring the economy. So if we decide at the summit in Rio that we want to make a genuine effort to make that transition to the green economy, it will have enormous implications on trade. Partly because it will mean that we have to favor green development over alternative forms. We have to give preference to green solutions over ones that we are using today. This has trade implications. Secondly, it'll mean that we have to adopt a whole series of environmental norms and standards, which, if well designed, should cause no trouble for the trading system. But when you're setting a norm or a standard, there's always that risk that it will give preference to domestic production. So the vigilance that WTO always shows on green protectionism will have to be redoubled. Our view is that you can go to a green economy while favoring trade. You can find a win-win solution, as Ambassador Teehankee has said. But doing so will require that WTO work very closely with the environment and development community that will meet in Rio to ensure that we actually achieve both ends at the same time. I'm sure you know that in the lead up to Rio, there is a fear on the part of developing countries that this green economy idea is nothing more than an attempt to give the rich countries an advantage once again. And I think that that's really the danger that we face.
Is there a threat of green protectionism, Manuel?
Well, yes, in the sense that on the domestic economies must and want to increase their capacity for exports or local production of environmental products. So there is this issue, is green liberalization targeted at allowing only exports from certain producers to other countries. So I think there is this debate, which also goes into what Mark has said of outlining and prioritizing green goals that will be consistent with developmental goals. And this may involve affecting trade, perhaps in regional trade. There may be an impetus for certain regional food production chains rather than only international. But again, this is a whole debate that we must all endeavor to engage in order to arrive at solutions and cooperation in the end.
This notion of cooperation, not only between governments, but between international organizations, civil society, the private sector, on that front, there's a lot of work to do, is there not, Mark?
Yes, there is. I think, though, that we have learned quite a lot in the past couple of decades. In WTO, when WTO began, it tended to act as if trade was a self-contained set of issues that would be dealt with here. And if you wanted to deal with labor rights, then you went to the ILO. And if you wanted to deal with the environment, you went to UNEP. And I think what we've learned is that, in fact, these issues are not isolated. In fact, the only solution to them is by finding common solutions that work for all those involved. And I think that perhaps one of the lessons of the Doha round has been that we need to find solutions that genuinely work for development, that genuinely work for the planet. And so I think that there's a real opportunity for the WTO community, for example, to engage in the preparations for Rio, to ensure that we find a solution that works for trade, but also to ensure that in pursuing environmental goals or sustainable development goals, we don't unnecessarily trip over the trading system and cause frictions that really don't need to be there.
Can trade actually be supportive? Are there some specific things that the trading community can do which would be supportive of the goals that Mark has just outlined, Manuel?
Yes, in fact, here we go even a further layer, because trade and environmental goals is also intersects very closely with investment and encouraging the factors of production to come into your economy. So indeed, there is a way trade by having conversation with other communities as well as the investment community. These all have to be discussed in order to foster these environmental goals while encouraging increased trade flows to develop economies and to provide increased income and poverty alleviation.
Because it is true that as countries climb the developmental ladder, they focus more attention and energy on environmental priorities. Isn't that right, Mark?
Yes, they do, but trade can help deliver those. And I would go even further than the ambassador in saying, I don't think we can come anywhere near a green economy without acceleration of trade, without more open trade. Because we need to install clean energy technology. We need to install environmental technology. We need an acceleration of the uptake of those environmental solutions. And without trade, without investment, that's simply not going to happen at the pace that it's necessary. So I think that we should be wary of the kind of promise when we say we're going to meet and try and save the world. But at the same time, I think we should work together to ensure that that governments go as far as they possibly can. Because the one thing we know is that so far we're not succeeding in turning the world around and setting it on a path to sustainable development.
Manuel, your final thoughts?
Well, my final thoughts is that indeed we must first and foremost cooperate. And this cooperation is in order to foster this triple win of trade gains, which is good for business, developmental gains, which is good for poverty alleviation and increased livelihoods, and third would be environmental gains, which is really good for the planet.
Mark, you have the last word.
Thank you. I just remind you that in 1994, when the governments adopted the Marrakesh agreements, the preamble calls for an approach to trade that is supportive of sustainable development. And for a long time that was dismissed as, well, sure, that's our aspirational goal, but we have business to do. And I think, in fact, what's happening is that we're realizing that trade has to serve an ultimate goal, and that ultimate goal is the kind of world we want our children to live in. And I think there's a real opportunity now to get there.
Mark Halle, Manuel Teehankee, thank you to you both, and thanks to you for watching WTO Forum.